It was the early years of the medieval age, a time when travel itself was both a peril and a privilege. The world was still untamed, and the paths across valleys and mountains were drawn not by maps, but by the memory of those who had dared to walk them before. Two friends, both bound by the unspoken trust of companionship, decided to embark on a journey that most would hesitate to even dream of. A passage into the heart of Kashmir. The decision had not been sudden. For months, perhaps even years, the thought of seeing the valley had lingered between them like a whisper of fate. Stories had reached their ears from travelers and wandering monks, stories of a land so fertile and green that it seemed blessed by heaven itself, where rivers sang through meadows and the snow-capped peaks held mysteries older than kings. But these stories were always wrapped in warning. The roads were treacherous, the forests deep, and the lands ruled by chieftains who bowed to no law but their own. Yet, as is often the case with youth and friendship, the risk became fuel for desire. Their journey began before dawn, when the air still clung with the dampness of night. The small village behind them faded into mist, its thatched roofs no more than shadows. Each carried only what was necessary: a bundle of dried food, a water-skin, a woolen cloak, and a staff. Horses were too costly and dangerous to maintain, for bandits often targeted riders first. On foot, they were less obvious, less likely to attract the greed of desperate men. The first days of travel were filled with the rhythm of footsteps and the slow unfolding of the land. They moved through rolling hills, past farms where the morning smoke curled from hearths, and into woodlands where the canopy swallowed all trace of sky. Sometimes they walked in silence, letting the sounds of nature guide them. Other times they shared stories of their youth, dreams of what lay ahead, and even doubts they dared not confess at home. Every word spoken between them carried the weight of loyalty, for they both knew this journey could claim them at any moment. As the sun rose higher, the roads grew lonelier, the villages grew fewer, and the people more suspicious. In some places, a stranger was treated with cautious kindness, offered bread in a corner of the hearth. In others' eyes followed them with hostility, and doors were shut before they even knocked. At night, they would take turns keeping watch, listening for the snap of branches or the howl of wolves. The flickering firelight carved their faces into masks of determination. And though sleep often came in fragments, they pressed onward. On the fourth day, they crossed paths with a caravan of merchants. The men were guarded, their carts heavy with bolts of cloth, spices, and copper utensils. The leader, a man with a beard streaked with gray, warned them against taking the northern path. "The passes are watched," he said, lowering his voice, "not by king's men, but by those who kill first and ask after. If you must reach Kashmir, follow the river. It is longer, but the waters will guide you. And if the river leads you astray, at least you will not die of thirst." His words lingered like smoke in their minds long after the caravan had vanished into dust, choosing caution over speed. The friends followed his advice. The river became both a companion and a challenge. Its banks were soft with mud, and sometimes they had to wade through cold waters to keep their direction. But the sound of rushing water also brought comfort. It meant life, it meant direction, and it drowned the silence that often made their thoughts too heavy. Along the banks, they saw herds of deer, and once, in the distance, a great bear rising on its hind legs before vanishing into the trees. The wilderness was alive, and every day tested their endurance. Hunger became their greatest trial. The dried bread and salted meat they carried diminished quickly. Foraging was uncertain, and though one of them knew how to set simple snares, days passed before they caught even a rabbit. Their stomachs growled through the night, and yet they shared everything equally. In the silence of the forest, the act of breaking bread together felt almost sacred. It was not the size of the portion, but the bond of the gesture that kept them going by the 10th day. The landscape began to change. The air grew cooler, sharper, and the land lifted beneath their feet into slopes and ridges. In the distance, they could see the faint outline of mountains, pale as though drawn by the hand of a painter. Each step toward them felt heavier, but also filled with a strange excitement. This was no longer a journey through common lands. This was a step into the unknown. One evening, as twilight spread across the sky, they came across a shepherd. The man was young, his hair wild, and his flock scattered across the hillside. When asked about the road to Kashmir, he laughed, not cruelly, but as if they had asked a child's question. "The road," said. "There is no road. Only paths that goats take, and men who know the mountains. If you have courage, the valley may open its arms to you. If not, the mountains will close them forever." His words were like both a warning and a blessing. And with that, he returned to his sheep, leaving them to wonder whether his laughter meant hope or doom. Nights in the hills were harsher. The cold bit into their skin, and the firewood grew scarce. Often they huddled together beneath their cloaks, breathing through chattering teeth. The stars above seemed brighter, closer, but they offered no warmth. Sleep was broken, and dreams haunted by fears of avalanches, of falling stones, of unseen hands dragging them from their path. Yet, in the morning, when the first rays of sunlight painted the peaks, they would rise again, driven by the thought of the valley beyond. Their friendship, tested by fatigue and fear, also grew stronger in these days. They no longer needed to speak to understand each other's resolve. A glance, a nod, a silent offering of water, these became their language. And though the world around them seemed vast and uncaring, they carried within them a small world of trust that no storm could break. On the 12th night, something happened that neither would ever forget. As they camped near the edge of a gorge, they heard voices in the dark. Not the voices of animals or the whisper of wind, but human voices, rough, low, and approaching. Bandits. The two friends extinguished their fire at once, crouching in the shadows with hearts pounding. The footsteps drew nearer, the voices louder, until they could make out words, talk of spoils, of travelers robbed, of lives ended without mercy. The friends gripped their staffs, ready to fight, if discovered. But fortune favored them. The bandits passed by, unaware of the silent figures hidden among the rocks. When the danger was gone, the two sat in silence for a long time, knowing how thin the line was between survival and death. By the time dawn broke, they had only one thought. They had to move faster before fortune ran dry. Their legs ached, their lips cracked, but determination was stronger than pain. The valley of Kashmir awaited, though still hidden behind the wall of mountains. And with each step, with each breath in the thinning air, they knew that what they sought was no longer just a place, but a trial of the spirit itself. The mountains did not open their gates easily. From the moment the friends left behind the gentler slopes of the lowlands, the land began to change into something untamed, something that demanded respect with every step. The paths became narrow ridges carved by centuries of wind and rain. Stones crumbled underfoot, and more than once they nearly slipped into the ravines yawning below. The air was thin, cold enough to sting their lungs, and each breath came heavy, as if the mountain itself wished to test whether they were worthy to cross. On the first morning of this new climb, they awoke to frost coating the grass, their cloaks stiff with frozen dew. The sun rose, but it brought little warmth. Around them, the silence was immense. No village smoke, no farmer's call, no barking of dogs, only the cry of distant eagles circling the peaks. The realization sank in. They were leaving the world of men behind, stepping into a wilderness where only the strong or the desperate dared to tread. The shepherd's words echoed in their minds. There is no road, only paths that goats take, and men who know the mountains. The truth of that statement revealed itself with every turn. Sometimes they followed faint trails that wound between boulders, but more often they moved by instinct, keeping the rising sun at one shoulder and the river's distant glimmer as their guide. They learned to read the land, how the wind gathered in hollows, where the snow crust was strong enough to hold their weight, and where it concealed a hidden drop. Food became scarcer still. The forests had thinned, and the only trees they saw were stunted, clinging desperately to the rock. Their snares caught nothing, for here no rabbits dared to wander. Once they spotted a mountain goat high above, its horns like curved blades against the sky. Hunger gnawed at them, but the beast was far beyond their reach. Instead, they chewed on hard roots they dug from the soil and melted snow for water. The body grew weak, but the spirit strangely grew sharper, as though hardship itself was forging them into something harder than flesh. By the fourth day in the highlands, their progress slowed to a crawl. Cliffs rose before them like walls, forcing them to climb on hands and knees. Their fingers bled from gripping stone, and more than once, a loose rock nearly dragged them down. They tied their cloaks around their waists to keep from tripping. Their staffs now used more as climbing poles than walking sticks. Each evening, when they finally collapsed onto the cold ground, they no longer spoke of home or dreams. They only breathed, grateful to still be alive. Yet, not all moments were despair. Sometimes, the mountains revealed their hidden beauty. On one afternoon, as clouds parted, they saw before them a valley of snowfields glowing under the sun, a sight so pure it silenced both into awe. The light caught on the peaks, turning them to fire, and in that moment, their exhaustion was forgotten. They felt as if they had been permitted a glimpse into a world untouched by man, a reminder of why they had come so far. But beauty was always shadowed by danger. That very night, as they huddled behind a ridge to escape the wind, they heard the rumble of an avalanche. It began as a distant growl, then swelled into thunder. The mountain shook beneath them as snow cascaded down a slope not far away, burying rocks and trees in its path. Their hearts pounded, for had they chosen a different route, they might have been crushed under that roaring tide. The mountains, they realized, were alive and merciless. The next days blurred together in a rhythm of struggle. Climb, stumble, rest, move again. Their bodies grew leaner, their eyes hollow, yet they pushed forward. In these days, words between them grew fewer but deeper. When one faltered, the other offered a hand without question. When despair showed in the eyes, a simple nod was enough to kindle strength. Their friendship became more than companionship, became the rope that held them from falling into the abyss of fear. On the 9th day of climbing, they stumbled upon something unexpected. Ruins. Stones, carved by human hands long ago, jutted from the slope, half buried in moss and snow. A broken wall, a crumbling arch, and the faint outline of a shrine. Though no roof remained, they recognized the shape of an altar. Someone, long before them, had built a place of worship here. Perhaps for the mountain gods, perhaps for protection against the unknown. The sight struck them with both wonder and sorrow. Others had passed this way. Others had prayed for safe passage. Perhaps not all had received it. They chose to rest there that night. In silence, they lit a small fire within the circle of stones, feeling the presence of those who had once knelt in prayer. One of them murmured softly, "Not a prayer, but a promise. If we reach the valley, we will remember this place. We will remember the ones who tried before us." The flames flickered, casting shadows against the broken wall, as if unseen figures bowed in silent agreement. The next morning, their journey brought them to the highest point yet. From there, they could see a horizon of endless peaks, layer upon layer of mountains fading into the distance. Somewhere beyond, hidden in folds of rock and cloud, lay Kashmir. Yet the way forward was unclear. Paths diverged and vanished. Snow covered everything, blurring directions. It was then they realized that without guidance, they could wander endlessly and never find the valley. That very day, fortune strange and unexpected appeared. As they descended into a narrow gorge, they saw smoke rising from a hollow, Cautiously, they approached, staffs in hand, ready for danger. What they found was a camp, a small fire, and beside it, an old man wrapped in furs, his face weathered by years of wind. He was no bandit, no merchant, but a hermit perhaps, once a traveler like them, now dwelling in the solitude of the mountains. The hermit greeted them, not with suspicion, but with quiet acknowledgement. As though he had been expecting them, he shared with them a broth of roots and herbs, bitter but warm, and listened as they told of their journey. When they asked the way to Kashmir, he pointed to the east. "The valley lies there," he said, his voice like the rustle of leaves. "But the mountain will not surrender easily. You must follow the path of water. Where streams gather, there lies your passage. Trust not the ridges, for they lead only to cliffs. Trust the rivers, they know the way." That night, they slept under the hermit's shelter, and for the first time in weeks, they felt warmth, not just from the fire, but from the presence of another soul who understood the mountains. Before they left, the old man gave them a small charm carved of bone, etched with patterns too ancient to read. "Carry this," he said, "not for protection, but to remind you that many have walked before you, and many will after. You are only a part of the mountain story." With new strength, the friends set out again, following the hermit's advice. Streams trickled from melting snow, joining into rivulets, then into rushing torrents. They followed these waters downward, through hidden valleys and across icy bridges formed by frozen cascades. Every step still tested them, but now they felt guided, no longer wandering blindly. Yet the mountains were not done testing them. On the 12th day, as they crossed a narrow ledge above a roaring river, the ground gave way beneath one friend's foot. He slipped, his body swinging over the edge, clinging desperately to a root jutting from the rock. For a moment, death was certain, but the other, without hesitation, dropped his staff, crawled forward, and grasped his arm. Muscles strained, hands bled, but inch by inch, he pulled his friend back onto solid ground. They collapsed together, breathing hard, the nearness of death binding them tighter than any vow could. When the danger had passed, they rose again. Their legs trembled, but their will did not. The valley waited, and they knew now that every trial they had faced, the hunger, the cold, the silence, the bandits, the avalanche was shaping them into men who would not turn back. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, the hidden land of Kashmir awaited, wrapped in mist and mystery. And as the wind howled around them, they pressed onward, two souls against the might of the mountains, carrying with them not just the dream of a valley, but the story of survival itself. The first signs of Kashmir revealed themselves not in grand vistas, but in whispers. The land began to soften as the friends followed the mountain streams eastward. The jagged cliffs slowly gave way to slopes covered in grass. The wind, once sharp with ice, now carried a damp fragrance of earth and pine. It was subtle, almost hidden, but they felt it in their bones. They were nearing something different, something alive with a rhythm, unlike the silence of the peaks. For days, they had known only gray stone, snow, and hunger. But here, faint touches of green appeared. A cluster of wildflowers clung to a rock. A small bird darted between bushes. Even the streams seemed to sing differently, their rushing waters more playful, less severe. At night, instead of the endless howl of wind, they heard the chirping of crickets. Their bodies were still exhausted, but their hearts lifted with a fragile sense of hope. On the third morning after leaving the hermit's shelter, they climbed a final ridge and stopped, unable to move. Before them stretched a valley unlike anything they had imagined. The slopes were carpeted with meadows, dotted with trees that glowed in the sunlight. Rivers braided across the land like threads of silver, and in the distance, framed by snowy peaks, lay the vast basin of Kashmir. The stories had not lied. It was as though they had stepped into another world, hidden from the cruelty of the mountains. For a long while, they said nothing. They simply stood, breathing in the sight, letting the weight of their suffering fall away in the face of such beauty. Then, slowly, they began their descent. The air grew warmer, the ground softer. With every step downward, they felt as if the valley itself was welcoming them, drawing them closer with invisible hands. The first people they encountered were herders tending their flocks on the lower slopes. Unlike the suspicious eyes of the lowland villagers, these men regarded the strangers with curiosity more than hostility. Their language was thick with accents, yet their smiles were cautious but not unkind. One herder, seeing their worn clothes and hollow faces, offered them a bowl of milk and bread. The taste was simple, but after weeks of scraping by on roots and snow, it felt like a feast fit for kings. They soon realized that life here followed its own rhythm. Small hamlets dotted the valley floor, houses built of wood and stone, smoke rising lazily from chimneys. Fields of barley swayed in a breeze, and orchards bloomed with apple blossoms. The valley was not untouched by hardship. Scars of old raids were visible in some burned walls, and every man carried a blade at his side. But compared to the ruthless wilderness they had crossed, it was paradise. Yet the friends knew they were still outsiders. People greeted them politely, but watched them with quiet caution. Travelers were rare in these lands, and strangers could bring both fortune and danger. The two friends spoke little, keeping their voices low as they tried to blend into the rhythm of the valley. But every step reminded them of their purpose, not merely to survive, but to witness this land, to feel its truth beyond the stories told around distant hearths. As they wandered deeper into Kashmir, they encountered a settlement larger than the rest of the village, clustered around a wooden temple. The temple's carvings told stories of gods, rivers, and mountains. Intrigued, they approached, and an old priest welcomed them inside. The air was heavy with incense, and lamps flickered against the painted walls. The priest listened as they explained their journey, though they revealed little of their homeland. After a long silence, he spoke. The valley does not reveal itself easily. You have suffered, therefore you may stay. But remember, this land belongs not to you, nor to any man. It belongs to itself. Those words lingered. The friends stayed in the village for several days, resting their weary bodies. They mended their cloaks, shared stories with the locals, and learned fragments of the language. Nights were filled with laughter, but also whispers of caution. Raiders still prowled the borders. Travelers vanished without trace. And though the valley seemed at peace, it held secrets that were not easily seen. One evening, as they sat near the river's edge, an old woman approached them. Her eyes were sharp, her back bent with years, but her voice was clear. I have seen men like you before, she said. They come with wonder in their eyes, and they leave with shadows in their hearts. The valley gives much, but it takes something in return. Be careful what you seek. Without another word, she vanished into the night, leaving them uneasy. The days passed in a blur of discovery. They walked through orchards, heavy with fruit, tasted saffron tea offered by farmers, and sat beneath towering china trees whose leaves whispered with the wind. Children followed them with laughter, and for the first time since leaving home, they felt the warmth of belonging. But beneath the beauty, it was tension and undercurrent they could not yet name. It revealed itself one night, when shouts echoed through the village. Torches flared, and men ran toward the fields. The two friends joined them and saw shadows moving among the orchards. Raiders from beyond the valley, their blades glinting in the firelight. The villagers fought fiercely, defending their land with axes and bows. The friends, though weary, joined the struggle, striking with their staffs. Blood was spilled, screams tore the night. And though the raiders were driven off, the peace of the valley was broken. After the fight, the friends sat in silence, their hands trembling. They had come seeking beauty, but found themselves pulled into the struggles of a land still scarred by violence. The villagers thanked them, but the old priest's words returned. This land belongs to itself. They realized then that to witness Kashmir was not just to see its beauty, but to understand its pain, its resilience, and its refusal to be conquered by either outsiders or time. As dawn broke over the valley, painting the mountains in gold, the two friends knew their journey was far from over. The path ahead would not be easy, but whatever lay beyond, they were no longer the same men who had left their village weeks ago. The valley had marked them as it marked all who dared to enter. The valley of Kashmir, though breathtaking in its beauty, revealed new faces with every passing day. At first, it had seemed like a dream. Orchards heavy with fruit, rivers flowing like threads of silver, and villages where laughter rose with the smoke of cooking fires. But the longer the two friends stayed, the more they came to see what lay beneath the surface. The valley was not a place of pure peace, it was a land of resilience, where beauty and hardship were woven together as tightly as the warp and weft of a loom dot after the night of the raid. The friends carried a new awareness in their hearts. They had felt the sting of danger even in paradise, and it reminded them that no land, no matter how rich, was free of struggle. The villagers, though grateful for their help, spoke little of the raiders. Instead, they returned to their fields as though nothing had happened, their silence saying more than words. This was not the first time, and it would not be the last. The friends tried to settle into the rhythm of valley life, but they remained outsiders. Their faces, their speech, their ways of moving through the world marked them as different. Yet they were tolerated, and at times welcomed. Farmers invited them to share in the harvest, offering apples so crisp that the juice ran down their chins. Shepherds laughed as they taught them to guide flocks with whistles. Children asked endless questions, tugging at their cloaks, begging for stories of lands beyond the mountains. Still, not all gazes were kind. Some elders watched with suspicion, whispering among themselves. Strangers brought change, and change was a blade that cut both ways. One evening, as the friends sat by the temple, a man approached them. He was tall, with a scar running down his cheek, and his eyes burned with intensity. "Why are you here?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. "The mountains are not kind, yet you crossed them. Men do not risk such a journey without reason." The friends exchanged a glance. They had no lies prepared, and so they spoke simply, that they had come to see the valley, to witness what so many had spoken of, to feel the truth of the land with their own eyes. The man studied them for a long time before nodding once. "Then see it," he said. "But no, the valley does not belong to you. It will never belong to you. Remember that, and perhaps it will let you leave in peace." His warning clung to their minds like the mist that hung over the rivers. The days that followed took them deeper into the valley. They traveled with shepherds to high meadows, where the grass grew thick and wildflowers colored the slopes. They listened to the ringing of bells around the necks of goats, the sound echoing through the hills like music. Nights were spent under open skies, where the stars seemed so close they could be plucked like fruit. Yet in the stillness of those nights, they often wondered how many others had stood here before them, feeling both wonder and unease. One afternoon, they stumbled upon ruins hidden in a grove of china trees. Walls of stone, long collapsed, hinted at a settlement once thriving, but now forgotten. Moss crept over carvings that no one living could read. The villagers said little of such places, shrugging when asked, as if silence itself was part of their history. But the friends could not shake the feeling that the valley was filled with ghosts, not the ghosts of spirits, but of people, lives once lived and lost, their stories buried in the earth. It was during their wanderings that they first heard of the King's Garden. The name was spoken with reverence, as though it were a place touched by both myth and truth. According to the villagers, far deeper in the valley lay gardens planted centuries ago by rulers who wished to capture paradise on earth. Terraces carved into hillsides, fountains fed by hidden springs, orchards arranged in perfect symmetry. It was said the place still existed, though few outsiders had ever seen it. For the friends, weary of war and hardship, the thought of such a place was irresistible. So they set out, guided by the river and the whispers of locals. Days stretched into weeks as they moved through villages, fields, and forests. They saw saffron fields glowing gold in the morning sun. They crossed bridges of wood, swaying over fast rivers. They entered groves where the trees seemed older than memory, their branches twisting into shapes that resembled the hands of giants. The journey was not without hardship. Storms lashed the valley, forcing them to seek shelter in caves. And once they nearly lost their way in a marsh where the ground sucked at their boots, but always the valley offered a path forward, as though it wanted them to see more. At last, they reached the place the villagers had spoken of. The king's garden lay before them, half wild, yet unmistakably shaped by human hands. Terraces rose in gentle steps, overgrown with grass, but still symmetrical. Stone channels carried water that sparkled in the sunlight, feeding fountains that still trickled after centuries. Orchards, though unkempt, still bore fruit, and at the center, beneath the shade of massive china trees, stood a pavilion of stone. Its roof collapsed, but its pillars etched with carvings of flowers and vines. The sight left them breathless. Here was proof that the valley was more than nature's gift. It was a canvas shaped by generations who had lived, ruled, loved, and dreamed. They wandered through the terraces in silence, touching the stones, tasting the fruit, listening to the water. It was paradise, but also a reminder of impermanence. Even the works of kings could not escape the hands of time. That night, they camped in the pavilion, the stars visible through the broken roof. One of them whispered, "We came seeking beauty, and we found it. But we also found sorrow. The valley is not just a place, it's a story, and we are only guests within it." His companion nodded, staring into the fire. "Perhaps that is what the old priest meant. This land belongs to itself. We cannot claim it. We can only witness it." Their words lingered, heavy with the weight of truth. In the days that followed, they continued to explore, but something had shifted. They no longer saw the valley as a place to conquer with footsteps, but as a living being to be respected. They walked slower, listened more. They sat with farmers and listened to their struggles, the fear of raids, the difficulty of winters, the hope for harvests. They learned songs sung by shepherds, their melodies rising with the wind. They watched children dance under the trees, their laughter carrying further than the sound of bells. And yet, the shadows remained. One evening, as they returned to a village where they had left their packs, they found smoke rising. Raiders had struck again. The houses were charred, the fields trampled, the people mourning. Among the dead lay faces they recognized men who had shared their bread, children who had tugged at their cloaks. Grief struck them like a blade. They helped to bury the dead, their hands covered in earth, their hearts heavy with helplessness. That night, as the valley lay silent under the weight of loss, the two friends spoke quietly. "We thought this land was paradise," one said, "but paradise is not free. It demands blood as much as beauty." The other nodded. "And yet, even now, it is worth it. Even now, it is unlike any place we have known." They fell silent, listening to the river rushing in the dark, carrying both life and sorrow in its endless song. The valley had welcomed them, tested them, and revealed itself piece by piece. But they knew now that their journey was far from finished. Beyond the orchards, beyond the rivers, beyond even the king's garden, deeper truths, still weighted truths, they had not yet touched. And so, with heavy hearts but unbroken spirits, they prepared to continue, knowing that every step forward would write another line in the story of two friends who had dared to cross the mountains and enter the heart of Kashmir. The morning after the raid hung heavy in the air. Smoke still lingered above the ruined village, drifting across the valley like a shroud. The two friends walked among the survivors, offering what little comfort they could, lifting beams, carrying water, helping mend what was left of homes. Yet nothing could replace what had been lost. Grief had settled into the valley like a silent guest, unwelcome yet impossible to drive away. The villagers, hardened by years of struggle, did not wail. They worked. Women collected what grain could be salvaged. Children gathered stones to rebuild walls, and men sharpened blades not only for work, but for defense. The friends, though strangers, joined in this rhythm. Their hands blistered from carrying wood, their muscles aching from labor. In the act of rebuilding, they felt themselves woven more deeply into the valley's story. They were no longer just wanderers, they were witnesses, and now participants. That night, as they sat by the river, one of them said softly, "This valley is not only paradise, it is a battlefield, though not one fought by kings and armies. It is a struggle for life itself. Every harvest, every fire lit, every roof raised is a victory." The other nodded, staring at the water rushing by. Perhaps that is why it is so beautiful. Because it endures. Because it survives. In the days that followed, they continued deeper into Kashmir, driven not by curiosity alone, but by a growing sense of duty to see, to understand, to carry the truth of this land with them wherever life would take them. The valley opened itself like a vast tapestry, each thread revealing something new. They walked through saffron fields, where farmers bent low to pluck the delicate purple flowers that yielded threads of gold more precious than coin. The fragrance filled the air, rich and intoxicating. A farmer explained with pride how the crop had been tended for generations, each season demanding patience and care. "It is not enough to plant," he said. "You must wait. You must endure. The land teaches you that nothing precious comes quickly." They crossed forests where the china trees towered overhead, their branches spreading wide like protective arms. In autumn, their leaves blazed with fire, painting the ground in red and gold. Beneath those trees, villagers told stories of ancestors, of spirits who guarded the valley, of kings who had once built palaces that now lay in ruin. The friends listened, their imaginations alive with images of the past, feeling as though the land itself whispered through the voices of its people. One evening, they were invited to a wedding in a small village. It was a celebration unlike any they had known. Music rose from drums and flutes, voices lifted in songs both joyous and haunting. Women danced in circles, their garments flowing like waves, while men clapped and stamped their feet in rhythm. The friends were welcomed into the feast, their cups filled with warm milk, their plates heaped with rice, lamb, and spiced stews. For a night, the sorrows of raids and hardships were forgotten, drowned in the joy of community. As the fire blazed high and laughter filled the air, one of the friends whispered, "This is the valley's strength. Not its mountains, not its rivers, but its people. They carry sorrow, yet they still find joy. They endure, yet they still dance." But the valley never allowed them to forget its dual nature. Days later, as they traveled along the banks of a wide river, they encountered a funeral procession. A young shepherd had been found dead, likely caught in a rockslide high in the meadows. His family walked behind a bier in silence, their faces carved with grief, their voices low in prayer. The two friends followed at a distance, not wanting to intrude, but the weight of the moment pressed on their hearts. The beauty of the valley was inseparable from its losses. Every joy was shadowed by the knowledge that life here was fragile, easily broken. They pressed onward, moving toward the heart of the valley. The terrain shifted again, the meadows giving way to dense forests where sunlight filtered through leaves in broken patterns. The air was damp, filled with the scent of moss and wet earth. Streams trickled between rocks, their waters clear enough to see fish darting beneath the surface. Birds called from the branches, and once, in the distance, they glimpsed the silhouette of a stag, antlers wide as a crown dot in those woods. Right? They found another ruin, this one larger than before. It was a fortress, or perhaps a palace, its walls half buried in ivy, its towers broken and leaning. Within, they found carvings on the stones, faint but still visible, flowers, vines, patterns of stars. Here, once, rulers had lived, dreamed, and perhaps believed their works would last forever. Now, silence and birdsong ruled. The friends walked through the crumbling halls with reverence, touching the stones as though they were touching the past itself. "This valley remembers," one of them said softly. "Even when men forget, the stones do not." The other replied, "Perhaps that is why we came, not only to see what is here, but to feel what has been lost." Nights grew colder as autumn deepened, and frost crept across the grass. The villagers prepared for winter, storing grain, repairing roofs, mending cloaks. The friends helped where they could, splitting wood, carrying bundles of straw, learning how the people braced themselves for the harsh months ahead. They heard stories of winters so deep that villages were buried in snow, of wolves descending from the mountains, of hunger gnawing at families until the first thaw came. The valley's beauty was a mask. They realized beneath it lay constant struggle against nature's will. One night, as they sat with an elder by the fire, he told them a story. "This land," he said, "has been sought by kings, by conquerors, by strangers. All wanted to claim it, to own its beauty, but none could hold it. The valley is not a treasure to be kept. It is a flame it burns whoever tries to grasp it." His eyes gleamed in the firelight. "You are travelers. You see what it is? But remember this, you will leave. The valley will remain, stronger than you, stronger than me, stronger than all who think they can master it." The words sank deep into their minds, carried with the crackle of fire and the howl of wind outside. As weeks passed, the friends began to sense their journey nearing a turning point. They had crossed mountains, endured hunger and storms, fought alongside villagers, seen both weddings and funerals, gardens and ruins. They had touched the heart of Kashmir, but it had touched them even more deeply. It had carved itself into their spirits, leaving scars and memories alike. One evening, standing on a hillside as the sun dipped behind the peaks, they looked down at the valley spread before them. The rivers shimmered in the fading light, the fields glowed with the last warmth of autumn, and smoke curled gently from the rooftops. "This place," one whispered, "has changed us." The other nodded. "We will carry it forever. Even when we return home, even when we are old, it will live in us. The valley is no longer just a place. It is part of us." They stood in silence, the weight of the journey heavy, but also sacred. Ahead lay choices whether to remain through the winter or to attempt the perilous journey back across the mountains. Whatever they chose, they knew this. The story of Kashmir would never leave them. And so, with the cold winds rising and the first snows whispering on the peaks, the two friends prepared for what lay ahead, unaware that the valley's final lesson had not yet been revealed. The first snows arrived quietly, like a whispered warning. At first, it was only a scattering of flakes drifting across the valley, vanishing as soon as they touched the ground. Children ran through the fields, trying to catch them, laughing as though the winter's approach was a game. But within days, the mountains wore white crowns, and the cold grew sharper, biting through cloaks and into bones. The valley began to change life, slowed, preparations deepened, and an almost sacred hush fell over the land. The two friends had stayed longer than they had intended. At first, they told themselves it was curiosity that held them. The desire to see one more village, one more forest, one more festival. But as the air thickened with frost, they understood the truth. They had become part of this valley, tied not by blood, but by memory and struggle. To leave now, when winter came, felt like abandoning those who had shared their bread and their stories. And so they decided they would remain until spring, The villagers welcomed their decision. A small, half-abandoned hut near the edge of the village was given to them. Together, they patched the roof with straw, lined the walls with mud to seal the cracks, and laid thick blankets of pine needles across the floor for warmth. Each day was a lesson in survival. They chopped wood until their shoulders ached, carried buckets of water from the frozen stream, and learned how to stack grain so the damp could not rot it. The valley's rhythm was no longer that of wandering travelers. It was the rhythm of endurance. The sound of axes on wood, the lowing of cattle brought into sheds, the steady pounding of grain into flour. Smoke rose from every rooftop, carrying with it the scents of lentils, rice, and dried meats. Nights grew longer, the stars sharper in the frozen sky, and the silence of the valley more profound than anything they had ever known. One evening, while returning from gathering firewood, they found themselves caught in a snowstorm. The mountains seemed to vanish, swallowed by white mist, and the path beneath their feet disappeared. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at their clothes, stinging their faces with icy shards. They struggled blindly, calling out to each other, their voices nearly lost in the roar. Panic threatened to take them panic, and the knowledge that if they strayed too far, the valley would claim them at last. Guided by the faint glow of a torch carried by a searching villager, they stumbled back into safety, inside the warmth of a hut, shivering in near exhaustion. They realized the valley was teaching them another truth. Beauty could kill as surely as cruelty. Survival here was not guaranteed, not even to the strong. Only those who listened, who humbled themselves before the land, could endure. As days passed, they learned to adapt. They rose before dawn, helping to milk cows and feed goats. They learned to prepare kawa, the spiced tea laced with saffron and almonds, which warmed the body against the cold. They joined in the weaving of wool, their clumsy hands gradually mastering the rhythm of the loom. And in the evenings, by the light of a single oil lamp, they listened to tales. The elders spoke of ancient winters when snow lay so deep that roofs collapsed under its weight, when wolves prowled the edges of villages, their eyes glowing in the dark. They spoke, too, of times when armies had marched into the valley, their banners bright against the white fields, only to vanish in avalanches or starvation. The valley belongs to no one, an old man said. Not kings, not invaders, not even us. We are only guests, allowed to stay so long as we respect her will. There were lighter moments, too. In the evenings, the villagers sang songs that seemed to weave sorrow and joy together, their voices rising and falling like the river in spring. Children played games in the snow, rolling until they were soaked and red-cheeked. And sometimes the friends joined them, their laughter echoing against the frozen walls of the valley. For all its hardship, winter revealed another face of Kashmir, a face of resilience, of communities bound tighter than ever by the cold pressing in from all sides. One night, during a full moon, the villagers invited their friends to join a ritual. They gathered in an open space, stamping their feet against the snow to keep warm. Torches casting flickering shadows across the wide expanse. A drumbeat began, low and steady, and voices rose in a chant that carried far into the stillness. The ritual, they explained, was not for gods or rulers, but for the valley itself, way of honoring the land that sustained them, even when it tested them, standing among them. Breath clouding in the air, the friends felt the depth of belonging. They were no longer outsiders watching a foreign land. They were part of a story much older and larger than themselves. Yet winter was not only ritual and song. Hunger crept in as the weeks dragged on. Despite all the stores of grain and dried food, bellies often went half full. Some days, there was only a thin broth of lentils, and on others, little more than bread made from coarse flour. Children grew restless, the elderly weaker. The friends felt the gnawing of hunger in their own bones and began to understand why the people of this valley carried both joy and sorrow in equal measure. Life was never certain here. One day, word spread that a caravan had been sighted far beyond the frozen, rigid group of traders, attempting to pass through despite the dangers of winter. Hope sparked among the villagers. If the traders reached them, they might bring salt, spices, or even cloth, things scarce in the valley during these months. The friends joined the men who set out to meet the caravan, trudging through snow so deep it swallowed their legs. Hours passed, the cold unrelenting, until at last figures appeared in the distance, bent under heavy loads. When the two groups met, there was no talk of prices, no haggling. Instead, there was relief that they had found each other, that neither had been lost to the snow. Goods were exchanged, yes, but more than that, stories and warmth. Around a fire hastily built in the snow, the travelers and villagers shared food, laughter, and news of the outside world. For the two friends, it was a reminder that the valley was not cut off entirely, that even in its most isolating season, threads still connected it to the wider earth. As the months stretched on, the friends began to feel time blur. Days merged into nights, nights into weeks. The white world outside seemed endless, unchanging. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, change came. Icicles dripped during the day, the sun lingering a little longer, the air losing its brutal edge. Streams broke free from their icy prisons, trickling through the meadows. Birds returned, their songs tentative at first, then swelling into full chorus. Spring was coming. The villagers, weary but alive, began to smile again. Children played in the mud of thawing fields. Farmers prepared the soil for planting, and the two friends felt their spirits rise with the land itself. They had survived. Together with the valley, they had endured the long, merciless winter. One evening, as they stood on a hill and watched the snow retreating from the mountains, one of them said, "We came here as travelers, but we leave as something else. We are not the same men who walked into this valley months ago." The other replied, "The valley has marked us. Its mountains, its sorrows, its joys, they are carved into us. We cannot forget, even if we try." Okay? And as the wind carried the first scents of spring wet earth, new grass, the faint sweetness of blossoms yet to come, they knew their journey was nearing another turning point. Ahead lay the decision to stay longer or to return to the world beyond the mountains. But whatever they chose, the Valley of Kashmir would never again be just a place on a map. It had become a part of them. Spring had arrived at last. The valley that had been locked in white silence for months now burst into color as though awakened from a long dream. Snow melted into streams that laughed as they rushed down from the mountains, feeding fields where new shoots of green pushed bravely through the thawing earth. Orchards bloomed in clouds of white and pink, the fragrance carrying on the air like a promise. Birds filled the skies with music, their wings catching the light of a gentler sun. The two friends walked through this transformation with quiet wonder. Where once the land had tested their strength, now it seemed to reward them, revealing beauty almost too great for the heart to contain. Villagers, too, shook off the weight of winter. Women sang as they planted, men whistled as they worked the fields, and children ran freely across meadows, no longer buried in snow. Life returned with fierce joy, as though every soul in the valley had survived a battle and now celebrated victory. But with spring came also a question that weighed heavily on the friends. Should they remain, or should they leave? The mountains had opened once more, the passes becoming dangerous but possible. To stay meant to continue this life, to grow deeper into the valley's rhythms. To leave meant carrying its memory into the wider world, telling others of the place where beauty and hardship lived side by side. Like inseparable twins, they sought counsel from those they trusted. An elder told them, "The valley is not a cage, nor a gift to be held forever. It is a teacher. Some of its students remain their whole lives. Others are sent away, carrying its lessons to places that have forgotten such truths." A younger man said, "Stay. You have become one of us. Why leave what you have found? And a woman who had lost her husband in the winter told them softly, do what your heart commands, but never forget us. Never forget the valley. For days, the two friends wrestled with a decision. Each dawn, they woke to the songs of birds. Each dusk, they watched the sun sink behind the snow-capped peaks, and still they could not choose. The valley held them with invisible chains not of stone, but of memory and love. At last, one evening as they sat by the river, they spoke plainly to one another. If we stay, one said, we may live out our lives here. We may plant, harvest, grow old with these people. It would not be a bad life. The other nodded slowly. But if we leave, we carry the story into the world. We carry the truth that beauty is not simple, that joy is not without sorrow. Perhaps that is our duty, to witness and then to tell. And so the decision was made. They would leave not because the valley was less than they hoped, but because it was more. Too much to be contained by two lives alone. It had to be shared. The day of departure came quietly. The villagers gathered to see them off, pressing food into their hands, draping woolen shawls over their shoulders, blessing them with words and tears alike. Children clung to their arms, unwilling to let go, and the elder placed a hand on each of their heads. Go with strength, he said. You came as strangers. You leave as brothers. To climb back through the mountain passes was as hard as when they had first arrived. The snow still lingered in high places. The wind still cut like knives, and the path was treacherous. But now they carried not fear, but memory to step heavy with the weight of what they had lived. They paused often, looking back at the valley spread below them like a dream. From that height, it seemed fragile, small, almost unreal. Yet they knew better. It was vast beyond measure, not in size, but in spirit. On the final ridge, before the valley disappeared from sight, they stopped one last time. The rivers glimmered far below, the orchards bloomed like clouds, and the snow-capped peaks stood eternal against the sky. One of them whispered, voice breaking, we will never see its like again. The other replied, no, but we will carry it forever, in our hearts, in our words, in every breath we take. Kashmir is not left behind. It walks with us now. With that, they turned and began the long journey home. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with its own dangers and hardships, but something inside them had changed forever. The valley had carved itself into their souls, teaching them lessons that no book, no temple, no king could have offered. They had learned that beauty is fragile, yet enduring, that sorrow and joy are bound together, that survival is itself a kind of triumph. Years later, when they were far from the mountains, they would tell their story. They would describe the saffron fields, the china trees burning red in autumn, the songs sung in the cold nights, the laughter of children chasing snowflakes, the grief of funerals, the joy of weddings, the silence of ruins, and the endless strength of a people who endured all. Those who listened would shake their heads, wondering if such a place truly existed, and the friends would smile quietly, knowing that the truth was too vast to fit into words alone. For how could one explain a land that was both paradise and struggle, both garden and grave, both joy and sorrow? How could one capture the way it had changed them, made them see the world anew? The valley was not a story, was a living truth. And it lived now inside them. And so, though their footsteps carried them far away, a part of them never left. The valley of Kashmir, its rivers, its mountains, its songs, its sorrows, remained eternal. In the hearts of two travelers who had once wandered its paths and found themselves transformed. The journey was over, but the story would never end.